The old Blackwood Manor stood at the edge of town, shrouded in an eerie silence. Locals whispered tales of its haunted halls, stories passed down through generations. Some spoke of strange lights and eerie sounds emanating from the house at night. Others told of a family that had vanished within its walls. Their fate, a chilling mystery. One hot summer evening, a group of friends dared to venture near the abandoned house. There was Jake, the adventurous one, always up for a challenge. Emily, the skeptic, tried to mask her fear with a brave face. And then there was Daniel, the quiet observer, his mind racing with curiosity and apprehension. "I dare you to go inside," Jake said, his voice barely a whisper. The challenge hung in the air, heavy with unspoken fear. Emily hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. Daniel, ever the voice of reason, suggested they stay outside. But Jake's dare had already taken root, and they knew they couldn't turn back now. As they approached the house, a cold breeze sent shivers down their spines. The once grand Victorian mansion now stood decrepit and forlorn. The paint peeled from its walls like shedding skin, revealing the rotting wood beneath. Windows, like vacant eyes, stared back at them, their glass long gone. "This place is creepy," Emily whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Jake, trying to appear brave, chuckled nervously. Daniel, feeling a strange pull towards the house, stepped forward. He reached out and touched the rusted gate, its cold metal sending a jolt through his arm. The gate creaked open with a groan, as if warning them to turn back. But the die was cast. With a mix of fear and excitement, the three friends stepped onto the overgrown path, their shadows stretching out before them like dark omens. Inside, the air hung heavy with the smell of decay and dust. Cobwebs draped the walls like macabre tapestries, and the only light came from the slivers of moonlight that pierced through the boarded-up windows. The silence was broken only by the sound of their own breathing and the creaking of the floorboards beneath their feet. They moved from room to room, each one seemingly frozen in time. Furniture lay draped in white sheets, their shapes barely discernible in the dim light. A grandfather clock stood in the corner, its hands frozen at the stroke of midnight. The air grew colder and the shadows seemed to deepen, closing in around them. "Did you hear that?" Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. A floorboard creaked upstairs, the sound echoing through the empty house. Jake, his bravado fading, shook his head. Daniel, his senses on high alert, felt a presence, unseen but palpable. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. They cautiously made their way up the grand staircase, each step accompanied by a chorus of creaks and groans. The banister, once polished and gleaming, was now rough and splintered, its wood cold and damp beneath their fingers. The air grew heavy with a strange energy, a mixture of fear and anticipation. As they reached the top of the stairs, they heard it again, the distinct sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, coming from the end of the hallway. Their hearts pounded in their chests as they froze, listening intently. The footsteps stopped. "Hello?" Jake called out, his voice echoing in the stillness. Silence. Then a soft whisper, barely audible, seemed to come from the very walls themselves. The hair on the back of their necks stood on end. With a mix of fear and determination, they slowly moved down the hallway, their eyes scanning the darkness, their senses heightened. Each room they passed seemed to hold its breath, waiting for them to move on. The hallway opened into a large, dusty room. Moonlight streamed through a gaping hole in the ceiling, illuminating a rocking chair in the center of the room. It swayed gently back and forth as if pushed by an unseen hand. The air grew noticeably colder, and the faint scent of lavender hung in the air. "This is getting creepy," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. Jake, his face pale, nodded in agreement. Daniel, drawn to the rocking chair, felt a strange sense of sadness and longing. He reached out and touched the worn armrest, its smooth surface cold beneath his fingers. As he did so, he heard the whisper again, this time clearer, closer. It seemed to be coming from the walls themselves, a mournful whisper that sent shivers down his spine. He closed his eyes, concentrating, trying to make sense of the words. "Help me," the whisper pleaded. A chill ran down their spines as the whisper faded into silence. The rocking chair creaked rhythmically, a lonely metronome in the stillness. They exchanged nervous glances, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Suddenly, Emily gasped, pointing to a dusty dollhouse in the corner. One of the walls had partially come loose, revealing a tiny, yellowed piece of paper inside. With trembling hands, Daniel carefully retrieved the paper. It was a child's drawing, crudely drawn but filled with a child's innocence. Below the drawing, in a child's handwriting, were the words, "Me and Mama." A wave of sadness washed over them as they realized the significance of the drawing. The drawing sparked a renewed sense of urgency. They had to know what had happened to the family, to the little girl and her mother. They searched the room, their eyes scanning every nook and cranny, their fingers tracing the outlines of forgotten objects. Behind a towering bookcase, they discovered a hidden door. It was cleverly concealed, almost invisible against the dark wood paneling. With bated breath, they pushed the bookcase aside, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. "Are you sure about this?" Emily asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jake, despite his fear, nodded resolutely. Daniel, his curiosity outweighing his apprehension, took the lead, his hand gripping the rusty railing. The air grew colder as they descended, the smell of damp earth filling their nostrils. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the faint glow of their flashlight. As they reached the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves in a small, windowless room. The room was sparsely furnished, containing only a small wooden table and 2 chairs. A single lantern cast flickering shadows on the walls, illuminating a dusty trunk in the corner. With trembling hands, they lifted the heavy trunk onto the table and pried it open. Inside, amidst yellowed cloth and faded photographs, lay a leather-bound diary. Its cover was worn, the leather cracked and dry, but the words etched on its front were still visible. Eleanor Blackwood. Daniel carefully opened the diary and began to read aloud. The words, penned in elegant cursive, told a tale of love, loss, and betrayal. Eleanor Blackwood had fallen in love with a man her family disapproved of. Forbidden to be together, they had planned to elope, but their plans were tragically cut short. Eleanor's brother, driven by greed, had betrayed them, leading to their deaths. The diary ended abruptly, the last entry filled with heartbreak and despair. A heavy silence descended upon the room as Daniel finished reading. The weight of Eleanor's tragic story pressed down on them, the air thick with sorrow and regret. They had found the truth behind the house's haunted reputation, the answer to the mystery that had plagued it for so long. As they turned to leave, Emily felt a cold hand gently touch her shoulder. She gasped, spinning around to face the unseen presence, but there was no one there. The room was empty, the shadows still and silent, and yet she could still feel the lingering touch on her skin, cold and ethereal, a final farewell from the unseen guest who had shared her story with them. As they made their way out of the house and into the dawning light, they knew they would never forget their night at Blackwood Manor. The house may have been haunted by its past, but it was also a place of love, loss, and the enduring power of memory.